So just giving you a sense of what we're going to do, we're going to have 3 presentations of the work of each group, and then we're going to have kind of open discussion, trying to make connections between all of the work that's been done, and then we're going to have some closing remarks and a wonderful artistic performance to end the day. So without further ado, I'm going to be inviting Eric Meerkamper up to present the work of the team of Ways of Sharing.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you very much. So yeah, we're the group team, sharing team, hands up. Nice, nice, excellent. So we're going to go through some of the things that we summarized, had amazing conversations, tons and tons of ideas like everyone did. And we're just going to present them a little bit, the concepts as they are, and then the other groups are going to afterwards as well. So what I'd ask of you is, when you see these concepts, either again because you were part of it, or even more so because first time you're seeing these things, just kind of note ones that spark something in you. Like it's either something that you found surprising, something that you might find exciting, or even something concerning you. I don't know about that, or it triggers something. And then just note that down, and then after each of us kind of present what we're going to be doing, we'll have a discussion. And also try and look for things that might cut across, right? Like you say, oh, that's interesting, because we created these 3 different streams, but it's kind of artificial, right? It's just trying to create some some restrictions in a way so we can think in those little boxes. But ultimately, probably the most powerful ideas are going to be the ones that tap into something, deeply and cut across all of them. But there could be specific things as well. They'll also probably look somewhat different, like by design, right? We all had different groups and different things, so how we present them might be different. So what I'm going to be doing, and also just, it should be fine, but if there is anything from my people on my group that I completely misrepresent, someone put their hand up or throw something at me, but we should be okay. So what's that? No rotten tomatoes. We took out all the fruit from the back for that reason. I need the mural board up, and again, I just want to thank the team. Well, actually, everyone. I would love it if we could all really thank the teams and the students who put everything together. Like, let's give them a round of applause right now, because like making sense of like all these crazy great ideas or all these thinkers and putting it together in ways is fantastic in real time. So as you can see, we had lots of different things. We are we're going to ways of sharing. So just once we get to that, so ways of sharing, we were really looking at this interaction between learning and work. And how that's been changing and breaking down in many ways as well. Maybe the traditional ways of learning and how that fed into work has changed. The world of work has changed. Work from home, even the ways we learn to prepare people for the world, and all that's changing. Artificial intelligence and such. So yeah, maybe that just so quickly, and then we'll go into the details of it. But we're kind of looking at this overall theme of work and learning, and some of the themes we looked at were like harmonizing work and learning, people-centered workspaces, and sustainable learning methodologies. And then we generated a bunch of ideas under that. So actually we go to the one that keep going down, and the summary, so lots of things with lines and boxes and such. And this one here, yeah, that one right there is kind of the summary. So these 7 concepts. So these are some of the things that we found to be, actually I'll stand over here no, I think it's easier here actually, so I'm out of people's way. So can we summarize? There's lots of things. We tried to group them in a way that might make sense. There's some overlap and such with it, but they kind of broke into 3 main areas. One is really transforming education. The other one is really ideas around how do you bridge the gap. And then the other is really integrating, learning and work, and how does that change? So the first, these are just certain ideas. So one was this idea of reverse learning, versus the idea of We have to go in and figure out what kind of learning we're going to get. They'll prepare us for the world. To what extent should really we swap that role of the teacher and the student? To what extent can we really build skills that not just so you can be successful in a career, but actually successful in an entrepreneurial life, because increasingly, work will be something that will be created by individuals, not just where you fit in. So this idea of kind of how do we reverse this traditional learning model? The other one was this idea about failure and, we call it safe fail education. And when you think about innovation and change, and ultimately we know all innovation is usually the result of multiple failures over time and getting better and better. When educational systems are often quite punitive, is very much as if you don't pass, you fail, you don't get to progress. How can we create spaces and conversations in ways that you have like non-fatal failure, that you can really work on things and grow with time? And that is kind of a philosophical change in terms of how we would look at educational systems and how we progress people through it. But without that ability, will people be able to be successful in the world of work? The other one is kind of similar, but this idea of an inverted funnel of instead of trying to think about our education system very much about the outputs, right? So what are we going to create at the end? What are you going to get, and how is that going to be used as if, it's defined and we know that'll be useful? And how you change that around, that we're defining sort of the inputs, the important things that you learn, how you learn, as much as what you learn, and developing relationships and other ways of learning might be more important. That's the broader funnel, even if we don't know the exact output at the end. And does that set people up more for success and gives you the tools and the ability actually to navigate whatever the world is going to look like without trying to define and figure out exactly what you're going to need going forward? So that's kind of this inverted funnel is the idea. And I guess I talked about that one, sort of the educational evaluation reform. Again, trying to think of evaluation not as in judgment, but as improvement. And anyways, that's kind of similar to one we talked about before. Anyways, we'll go to the next one, back to kind of the in between, bridging the gap. One was really about what we call iterative applied learning. So there's this concept about instead of life as learning as a certain practice, but how it can be really a life-centered experience. So this is something that, of course, we continue with throughout our life, and this concept of it breathing, that is something that has to be iterative and ongoing, and it can't be just massive download at the beginning. And how do we continue to do that over time? And that is this idea of cycles, and it's organic, and we got to think about it as constantly changing and not kind of separate it and put it on its own. And it's just something that it's a living, breathing thing, and not as static as maybe we've structured it in the past. And then just the last couple things here, this kind of integration of learning and work. So life-centered work. So really looking at this idea of just having a diversity of skills and goals over time that we have to continue to build. Some of these things I realize are connected to what we had before. This is all very real time putting this together. And just having this all kind of portfolios, engagements of things that we are involved in. The playbooks for listening. So this is, in a way, kind of thinking more about the how, and then instead of just the what, instead of the content, but realizing that different cultures and different people learn and think differently. And it's interesting, even in our session, even what we were doing today, the process of coming to ideas, we kind of, say, okay, we're quickly, and we kind of, bring ideas down together, and realizing that kind of sets on a certain route where there's other cultures, where it's time. You have to create space for learning. You have to allow things to happen over time, and sometimes realizing that our structures very much define the outcomes, whether we realize that or not. And so fundamentally thinking about how we approach learning, and how we focus on relationships, for example, instead of just looking at content. And then I guess another theme, I guess it came again, is this idea of really people focus versus idea focus. So the importance of learning being a community-based feature, not just more, here's the individual that goes through it, and that there are many players with that. And that we really think about, someone mentioned sort of the resiliency of learning and being able to embrace, chaos and knowing things that will change. And that's uncomfortable, but we have to open up those systems if we want to be able to learn in ways that will respond to unknown futures as well. So anyways, those are some of the concepts that we have it. So if there's any of those, you think about it like, where things, obviously a lot of them overlap and they link in different ways. But if there's some of those things that I thought, that's really cool, that's an interesting idea, and particularly if it might, cut across some of the different, the different concepts that you're going to hear next. And then after that, we're just going to kind of have other ideas and stuff coming out. All right? Thanks. Here we go. Oh, no.
Thanks, Eric. As you can see, Eric does it extempore. I have to have my pieces of paper to be able to access them.
Two times, and then it works again. No. Hello, 1, 2, 1, 2.
Is this one on? Yeah. Woo! Ways of caring. Hands up. All right, we have there. Good. Nice set of important people. Thank you for all your work through the course of the day. Just wanted to reinforce Eric's point about listening and making your own notes, because as I'm sure you can appreciate, it's difficult for us technologically to come back and show you these high points. So the things that you find exciting, the things that you find interesting, things that you find challenging or want to speak more to when we open it up for plenary, please do make a note of those. So a couple of different things in our room, and as Eric observed, each of us, while we had a common design, it unfolds differently depending on the energy in the room, the subject matter, and so on. So some of my comments will be a little different in terms of format and process from Eric. We started off with a one-word exercise. I asked the group, what is the one word that for you links health and wellness, which was the essence. It's a ways of caring, but it was about health and wellness. And the range of words really demonstrated for me the breadth of interest and the breadth of background of the people in the room. So it went from words about security, the social determinants of health. Somebody had a problem with one word, that's 4. Things that were natural, things that were exciting, anxiety, dignity, spiritual well-being. That was one point that really resonated. So we're talking about physical health and mental well-being, but the idea of spiritual well-being really wasn't present in our prep materials and became a theme through our conversations. Accessible, money. No money, no mission. Resources were very definitely anchored right from the outset of our conversation. Community, connectedness. So that one-word exercise was very generative for us. And it led to a conversation about the acknowledgement of the challenge of being healthy on a planet that's unhealthy. And that, again, was a very grounding concept for us, linked to that sense of spiritual well-being. What I found interesting as I reflected back in the few moments we had to have a break was some of the tensions or the conundrums in our conversation. So, for example, we talked a lot about a very individualized self-focused, that became quite isolating, and that there needed to be a much more community-focused kind of approach if we were going to be healthy and well. And at the same time, though, that a community approach needed to be built on the needs of the individual. So you can feel the tension in that. We talked about this incredible short-termism in our current thinking and in our decision-making, and the need to move to long-cycle decision-making, more longitudinal thinking. But at the same time, we need to take action. The idea of self-reliance, the idea of self-efficacy. But if some of these changes are going to take root, we need change at the system level that requires our institutions, our policymakers to engage, but against a culture at the moment, a sense of real distrust in those same institutions. The idea of innovation being about change and adaptation, but at the same time, a lot of our conversation focused on the value of traditional ways, which aren't necessarily highly innovative. And one of the conundrums that I kept coming back and putting in front of the group was a lot of our supposed solutions were education and awareness. And yet we observed very early in our conversation that education and awareness has not led to action and change. But we keep coming back to it as being part of the solution. So we had ideas. I think that they need a lot of love still before they become what Luigi would think of as a strong format. So let me take you now in the Miro board to some of, I want to be down here with a thumbs up, so if we may. So we had 3 themes. The first one is around mental well-being. And you can see as we had lots of brainstorming around the solutions, and we tried to cluster those, I then asked the group, what is it that you would personally work on? What's interesting for you? Where's your energy? And invited them to prioritize that based on their own sense of whether that would have much impact in terms of addressing the issues, as well as whether they thought there was some ability to implement it. And you can see the thumbs up reflect what the group found to be individually the most important things to move forward. And I draw you back to one of the conundrums. Education and awareness gets a huge number. And I'm not suggesting we shouldn't do it. I'm just suggesting the question of whether it's really going to lead to change. And maybe part of, but what else might be necessary? And so you see in that education and awareness a whole lot around data. Data was really important to our group, building those early indicators, measuring over time, having data available. But also the idea of education and awareness about mental health, recognizing stigma still in many communities. Some people don't even know that they are having mental health issues. And so lots of different aspects to education and awareness, including how do we use technology as an enabler, given technology can be a contributor to mental health issues. Coming down here, before we move away, Jacob, the other area where you can see lots of energy and even a little heart was around nurturing that spiritual dimension and the relationship with nature. The comments and the examples of when our public spaces, when our institutions are built, taking into account the ability to be close to nature, whether it's Bridgepoint Hospital here in Toronto with a nature garden at the top. You don't see patients in the room, you see them, you see them up on the roof, being part of the natural environment. It's in a park. And their outcomes are so much better as a result of that. So the idea of a therapy park, the idea that students could be taken by their teachers into a natural environment where they're required to interact, as well as interact with nature. So lots of ideas around how do we nurture that spiritual dimension the relationship with nature, knowing that it contributes to better mental health and better overall health outcomes. So those were the two areas that really attracted the energy of the group in terms of trying to address what many people today see as a pandemic, our lack of mental health wellness. To our next theme, if we may, Jacob, coming across to theme 2, which was about inclusive care strategies and the whole challenge that we observe of the lack of inclusivity at so many levels, both in our formal health system as well as in the connectivity of our formal health system with the community. So what might be some of the areas where the group found they would be excited to work on? You have down here the big set of thumbs up about personal agency over health, which is having access to things like your own data, which gives you the advantage of being informed, self-aware, more in control. The idea of having this idea of having a digital twin, and then you can actually experiment on the twin, be able to look at their data, make again the idea of more informed decisions, tracking your medical history, the idea of power to choose your own healthcare solutions, a credit-based system, a transparent health system where you would actually be able to know how good different healthcare institutions and even healthcare providers are in terms of the particular intervention that you might need, and being able to choose that rather than the referral system that we currently have in place. So again, that focus on personal efficacy, personal agency. Holistic interventions, I'm sure you're not surprised when you see that under a title of inclusive care strategies. Interesting how our technology is enabling me to read and not read those different elements to holistic interventions. But again, the sense of connecting back to nature, the sense of bringing teams of providers together locally in the community to try and break down some of that distrust in the system, early interventions, things like that falling under holistic interventions. I do want to come over here too to the idea of healthcare advocacy, and a lot of thoughts here around a personal navigator, a life doula or a health doula to guide you through the system. Very much here a focus on medical ethics, and it's not that those don't exist, but making people much more aware of them and their rights, and within that also having more accountability in the system. We talked about the fact that many communities have been marginalized and even acted on or acted upon in looking for new healthcare breakthroughs, and that of course has created distrust in the system. Collective wisdom. So the idea of healthcare advocacy and redesigning or undesigning your life as you take some of that personal control doesn't mean that you have to let go of a number of mental models that you currently hold about what leads to a good life. And that was another theme. This idea of many of our mental models, like the 9-to-5 workday, are not conducive to good health. So from inclusive care strategies to our final theme, community resilience. And we looked at community in a number of different levels. The idea that to be in a community is conducive to being healthy rather than being isolated and feeling very much on your own, but also recognizing there are many types of communities, including a geographic, which is one of the ones that we sort of resort to in terms of talking about communities, but it's not the only type of community. And there were two big clusters that emerged in terms of thinking about community resilience. This whole focus on redesigning our public spaces to be more conducive to places where people could come together in community. and that these would be also built better for sustainability over the long term. So when there are these disasters, how do we have our buildings being built better for those? And that's probably going to take a whole different approach, which we call the environmental economics approach, to get the right incentives and so on in place. And that we need to do that, moving from this extractive to more of a giving and a gifting economy, taking into account things like indigenous culture, and need to really change that mindset. So that was one set of ideas. And then the idea of moving from the short term, that hustle culture, into designing for the long cycle, the eras over decades, looking beyond beyond that short term, looking more legacy, thinking of health over time, over the whole life cycle, even thinking about the transfer of wealth from individuals and families, thinking much more about that at the community level and what is good for the economy, good for the community, excuse me. So I think that reflects some of the big ideas and lots of associated ideas. And again, looking forward to further inputs from the group as we move into plenary. But for now, I'm going to pass to Kristina to talk about ways of living.
Thanks so much, Jane. Thank you. And thank you for bringing the podium up, because I too like to have paper. So before we get started, I also wanted to acknowledge our remote participants who were such active contributors to our conversations as well. And we had quite a variety of folks in our room. We had folks from Madrid, Nairobi, Calgary, Shanghai, Little Windsor, Ontario, my hometown. Always have to give it a shout out whenever I can. So I'm going to recap a bit of what we had happen in the room, but I also have 3 of my colleagues from within the room that we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive on some of the models that were beginning to emerge that could inform some thoughts around student projects here at BSI. So as Jane highlighted, all of us had something that unfolded a little bit differently throughout the day. So we were focused on the ways of living, and we had 3 key themes around redefining the ways of living, housing design, and also infrastructure development. 3 very interlinked kind of concepts that you had a lot of conversation going back and forth throughout the day, and 3 things that I felt like we had quite a few practitioners within the room with very deep knowledge of those particular topics. One thing that became quite evident early on in our conversation, and one of our participants very eloquently stated, that we have known the problems that we're facing for a very long time. We have also known a lot of the solutions that we have at our fingertips for a very long time, and yet we haven't really made a lot of progress. So how are we going to finally affect that change and have real progress happen? One of the other fundamental things that happened in our room was really early on shifting the conversation from thinking just about how all of these topics affect the human side of things to really thinking about it from an all of our relations piece. So how do we connect to the water? How do we connect to nature? How are all of these things informed and affected by one another? So we really started to move into solutions and looking for ways of learning from other jurisdictions. There was a lot of focus that we heard about from Dutch examples. Not surprisingly, they're an incredibly innovative country. One of the big outcomes that we've observed from them, though, is they have a perpetual sense of urgency that continues to drive them forward. And even though they have been so innovative over in the Netherlands in terms of looking at climate resiliency and in particular being concerned around sea level rise, they never really rest on their laurels. There is always this sense that they have to do more, that they're always at risk, and how do they continuously improve and protect their nation moving forward. So that sense of urgency that we see in some of the jurisdictions that are most effective is at a bit of a tension with that Canadian risk aversion that we kept sort of coming back to as well. So there was a notion about thinking about how we worked during the pandemic, in the heart of the pandemic, and what could we learn from behaving like we were all still in a crisis, still in a sense of emergency. A lot of very big things that had been sort of log jammed for years around public space and things like that suddenly happened during COVID because we had to find a way forward, whether that was around the bike lanes here in Toronto, a way that things were distributed. That caused certain things that we struggled with for decades to suddenly be unlocked. So how could we continue to think in that way? Also, one of the other conversations that came up constantly was this need for removing red tape, looking at approvals as we're thinking about housing. Everyone agrees we have a housing crisis here. So how can we get out of our own way and actually make timely change happen? And think about things differently and not be so stuck on the traditions that we have and how we've always done things. Another very important message is how important deep engagement at the community level is on all of these issues. Nobody knows what a community needs more than or better than the community that is living there. So how do we really make sure that we're listening effectively and responding to what is actually needed? Another sort of global theme that came out early on is overcoming the politicalization of many of these issues and the polarization that tends to happen in our conversations around things like climate, like affordability. How do we become more proactive and recognize the emerging shifts and be preventative and have a bit of preparedness in how we're responding to these crises? And then also to look for commonality amongst these different types of challenges and opportunities. There might be different drivers in different jurisdictions, but some of those solutions could still be applicable, whether we're looking at the energy crisis in China or we're looking at sort of getting into a sort of climate action framework here in Canada. There's still lessons we can be learning and collaborating on to actually achieve those goals. As part of our infrastructure conversation, I tried to guide the group on a little bit of a conversation about what is infrastructure. You know, that term can mean so many things to so many people. And I don't know if we have a picture of the discussion of what is infrastructure, but essentially, infrastructure is everything, and everything is infrastructure when it came to a city perspective. And a very important point that got brought back is even if we think about traditional infrastructure from a Western lens, if you then sort of apply the Indigenous worldview, that's a whole different set of infrastructures that we need to be thinking about around our social infrastructure and our relationships, and how do we put priority around that as well. So that's sort of at a very high level, some of the things that emerged. And I'll just walk through the Miro board ever so quickly, because what we had happen in that room was a brainstorm, dare I say, an idea tsunami. So we have a lot of teasing out that we still need to do on this Miro board. But what you really see is sort of 20 big ideas that emerged, some of which are cross-cutting, and then I'll have my colleagues come up and describe sort of 3 of them. So a toolkit for public spaces. What do we mean by public space? What are some of the governance models, the financing models that could come into play for that? How do we ensure equitable access to public space? And another important consideration is how do we lead with an equity lens when we're planning all of this, as opposed to having that as a bolt-on at the end. Again, we've talked about the approvals processes, governance for public space, disaster response thinking for every day, models for engagement. So this will be something that's cross-cutting. So how do we actually make sure that everyone is able to have a voice in these conversations early and often? Another interesting idea that was starting to get teased out is this notion around what happens in the sense of an emergency where you have to relocate not just a family, not just one household, but an entire community. And how do you keep that sense of social cohesion and that network of neighborhood that actually existed when they have to relocate and be displaced? We started thinking about retrofits to further the climate goals and assist in affordability. There was a really exciting example that came up, again, a Dutch example, of some amazing work that was done to actually hit net zero climate targets for housing in a 24-hour period from the time that the homes were identified, scanned, panels were fabricated and placed. So the amount of innovation and change that can happen quickly is quite striking. A really good focus on adaptive reuse. I won't steal their thunder. They're going to come up and talk about that. Self-built housing. Are there models to actually have some of the labor shortage issues that could be overcome by having people actually building parts of their own housing and helping to tap into that talent? modular and off-site construction so that things can be built faster. There was a bit of a conversation as well around that sense of urgency as it relates to housing, and a lot of the housing stock that we would be building will take a very long time if in big cities to build. So how can we short circuit that a little bit? Love this idea of embracing the lake. So we had a window that overlooked the slip at Jarvis, and I think that inspired some thinking about the water and how could we use the water differently. And I won't steal all of their thunder either because they're going to talk a little bit about that, but water-based housing and water transportation options as well. Material innovation, so mass timber and so on, zoning policy innovation, thinking differently about what type of housing we should be building, tiny home communities, localized decision making, like we're talking neighborhood level decision making as well. Cities as infrastructure, so the holistic city being thought of as infrastructure. Solving traffic issues, solving the conundrum that is digital infrastructure and affordability. This was another key tension that was identified and I think could cut through a lot of these things, is you have public policy objectives around things like digital inclusion, and you have private sector underlying financing models and funding and costs and so on. So how do you actually reconcile those two things? Resolving the hybrid limbo. What are we transitioning to? If we think about the hybrid situation as not an end state, but a transitional state, where are we actually headed to? And what can people aspire to and look forward to? And how can we actually make informed decisions about what infrastructure that we need, what types of spaces do we need in our housing and so on, if we actually know where we're headed, if we don't accept that this kind of transitional state is forever. And then ecosystem thinking to create alternative economic models in rural and urban communities, which we have some colleagues that will talk about that. So that's at a high level, the 20 big ideas, and there's a lot of sticky notes that go underneath each of those. But I'm going to ask one of the groups to come up and present. Kara, can we start with you? And do you want me to go chase down your board? Yes, the board's over there. I think he is, yeah. We have visual aids too.
I'm going to need the visual so I can remember. Okay, so I was in an amazing group. We had fabulous conversations. It's going to be hard to summarize everything, but we are number 20, the ecosystem thinking for alternative housing models. And this, we were really inspired by the idea of the local. So some of the presentations last night really focusing on some off the beaten path, non-urban examples. And we really ran with that throughout all of our conversations. So looking at how we can create almost sort of like a web of local production and services that is connected. So I'm just going to read, this is sort of our succinct statement here. How can we leverage ecosystem thinking to create alternative economic models shared by rural and urban areas, supporting small-scale production, development, and governance, integrating natural and industrial systems? So that's kind of our big picture concept. And to boil this down into something more specific that students could run with, we're really thinking about, okay, how can we look at all these different examples where we can decentralize things and give local communities opportunities to do things in their own way to reflect their own goals in their community, but create a web or an ecosystem where people can sort of share those things horizontally. So, for example, we talked a lot about prefabricated housing. We were really inspired by Watson Lake example, where they have a sort of micro factory and they're creating housing for their local northern community. So how can you use local materials, natural resources, create housing, local jobs through that process, and also create local homes? So that's sort of the localized. But then also, how can those local groups, production units, also feed into a more urban center where people are having like local procurement co-ops? So in neighborhood scales, they can actually buy these things directly from other small groups and affect local governance. We were really inspired by just the importance of trying to create a layer of local governance where we can have people doing more sort of granular decision making. We talked about transit as another example, How can we have people do sort of last mile planning for their own local area in terms of transit? Yeah, so that, I just lost my ring. Yeah, that's it.
Great, thank you very much. All right, if we can have our adaptive reuse group come up and have a quick little chat about that, that would be fantastic. And then we'll get the board up for our Embrace the Lake conversation.
Thank you. I'm going back to the podium here because I have my notes. Also want to acknowledge our team. I think we did a great job. We thought quite deeply and just dug into this issue that we were that we started to look at. Really started with this idea of thinking about office renewal and revitalization. So we called this right now like a holistic approach to addressing the puzzle of adaptive reuse to enable more suitable housing in the community. So again, thinking about office revitalization, really one of the first things that came up is needing to investigate better financial models to address this sort of puzzle of how do we renew a lot of this office buildings that are now becoming potentially irrelevant. We can talk about that in terms of where's the hybrid going, but if offices are going to disappear, we need to figure out what the financial models would be to unlock that as housing. Also needing this to investigate government policies that could better enable this, zoning instruments that might exist to enable this, as well as innovative planning models. So an example that came up with this was looking into Calgary, which streamlined office renewal in the approval process, as well as New York City, which created a department around office renewals. So looking at these as examples, investigating them, understanding what the success rates were, whether there were some barriers or opportunities that were unlocked, what we can really learn and apply by investigating those models. Another example that came up was this idea of a point system, so figuring out what it is that could enable and potentially incentivize more of the office renewals. So we talked a bit about the CMHC MLI Select program, which is an existing model for creating a kind of point system around revitalization of existing building stock, and as well as new builds. So seeing if there's elements of that model that could be maybe reapplied or investigated to understand how that might be able to unlock office renewals. So again, to accomplish something like this, we thought about what students could maybe do towards applying this. We talked about the need for better data around office renewals, the need to also understand the carbon implications. What are the trade-offs that are happening? One of the members of our group kind of highlighted the fact that based on their research, we know that office renewals likely, based on the embodied carbon and the reuse of the building structure, have about like a 4-year trade-off or payback for the carbon that's used versus new builds, which are about 14 years. So understanding that better and maybe quantifying that to unlock some of the potential of office renewals. And then again, being able to test the different incentives that might exist financially and model them out. Examples that came up were development charge rebates and how that might apply to the office renewal model to better unlock the potential. And then another big piece was how this can actually engage with specific communities at a local level to better unlock the potential of office renewals. So engaging with communities, working with folks that are more local to a given office tower, understanding what the needs might be of different community organizations and professional organizations, that maybe there's a way within the office renewal scope to incorporate some of the needs that community organization might have so that they can start joint venturing and making some of these barriers more possible. So creating incentives, joint ventures, responding to community needs. This touched on, again, some environmental issues, but also equity issues. So if we're considering the office renewal as a more holistic, community-oriented project, how might that minimize transit? How does it maximize access, minimize disruption within the community as well? So when you're renewing and building housing stock, how does that affect whether or not people are displaced? And how does that also maintain a sense of community? We also talked about what the results of this could be from a student project perspective. So thinking about a map where we could understand where the opportunities might lie, having a better understanding of the typologies of building types that could be renewed, not just office towers, but tower in the park, potentially also investigating how smaller scale residential buildings could be renewed based on zoning changes that are coming forth. And this could result in sort of guidelines and best practices for specific types. And again, an understanding of different models for partnership as well as project economics. So that's us.
Thank you. And I want to thank the entire room. And actually, I think we're a little tight on time. So the third group, if you can just raise your hand, they Embrace the Lake, which had a really exciting opportunity around a floating village, as well as looking at transportation, using the lake as another corridor for water taxis and ferries. If you'd like to hear more about that after, we will make ourselves available. But is it okay?
High points.
High points. Okay, high points. We'll do a quick little summary of that. Perfect. Thanks, Jane. I just didn't want to leave us too short.
Thank you, Kristin. Hello. The idea came from the modernist habits, the infill or fill-in projects. We are always filling the lands and producing the new buildings, and we are trying to solve all the residential problems as well as the traffic. We are creating another traffic problems, and we are trying to solve them again. We are in cycle in a sense. Then the idea started from the evacuation from the wildfire. And what happened as an experience, we saved people in 2021. There was a huge wildfire in Turkey. We saved some people by our boats and taking them through the sea. And also I was researching some kind of alternative living forms, permanent or temporary, about that for the communities. In the world, there are lots of sea neighborhoods. They are self-sufficient, they are sustainable, they are even providing their food from sea or from lake as well. And they are producing their own energy with solar panels, with wind turbines, and the water generators as well. And they are using the batteries, three kind of batteries, the traditional one, and the gel batteries, and of course the popular one and very durable one, lithium batteries. So in COVID, in pandemic, some people never struggled with the mental problems or socializing while they were living on their boats or on sea, let's say, or on water, because our landscape was our boat, and our landscape was our water, our sea, our lake. Then also it provided another opportunity, pontoon community as well. So after that, in group, we started to think about it's very related with the number 17, solving traffic issues. So Lake Ontario is here, the water is potential, so we can provide some floating islands, floating communities as well, connected with the sea. Then what I understood from here, the sea transportation is usually from Toronto Ferryport and the Toronto Island area. But we have lots of problems with the parallel streets like Dundas, Queen and King Street, etc. The vertical ones, especially at the east side, is much more better as far as I understand. So the idea came, why not we don't provide our nodes and provide another ferry port areas from east to west. then feed the traffic perpendicularly through the city, so we can take the loads of Gardiner and other busy streets in peak hours, mornings and evenings. Yeah, I think that's all.
Thank you. And that was a really, as we were talking about that one, it was interesting because it raised another tension. So the use of the water for something like housing and transit, and it's juxtaposed with the tension that we have when we talk to our Indigenous partners who really want to see the lake protected as a cultural heritage landscape. So how do you actually reconcile those two things too? So as we tease these things out, there's going to be a lot of nuanced conversations that we're going to need to have to think about holistically how do we sort through these things. So can I just have the people who are in the Ways of Living room? I just want to thank you all for an absolutely incredible day, and I hope that our paths will cross again, and I look forward to teasing this all out with some of you again. So thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Kristina. Wow, it certainly seems as though there were a range of conversations happening in the different rooms. And of course, as we were setting this up, we needed to assign you two different streams. Some of you was more obvious than others as to which stream you seemed to fit in, but everybody, it sounds like, had the opportunity to talk in their separate room about whether it was ways of living, ways of caring, or ways of sharing. What I want to do now is open it up, and particularly for those of you who, when you were first assigned, we had a couple of people in ways of caring who said, I don't know why I'm in this room. So you probably entered the morning thinking, I've got lots of things to say about ways of living or ways of sharing that you didn't have a chance to say because you were in ways of caring. So the floor is open. If you have any innovative cells left, I must say mine are rapidly diminishing at this point in the afternoon, but very interested to hear additional thoughts, even reactions to some of what you heard in the other rooms. Any takers on that? Sumi. Have we got a mic? Thanks, Aisha. From our wonderful Fire Integra project from last night, joining us from Northern Alberta. If we have a mic for him. How's your big outdoor voice? Do you have one? Yeah, you go.
It was actually a question for the Ways of Caring group. I got the impression that awareness wasn't, like it got brought up a lot, but it didn't seem like it's all that useful is kind of what I heard back. But if I look from a rural context to the urban group here, probably, it's very useful, very helpful, because, so these are just the notes I wrote. If you look from the rural context, if you see the interconnectivity and interreliance between rural communities and urban centers, so if you see that there is an interconnectivity, then awareness by the urban population to those rural social ecological issues highly relevant because the population base is in the rural centers and the voting blocks are in the in the urban centers, and so that means policy direction and elbow comes from the urban that way, and we really need your help on some of these topics.
I think the answer to that is I didn't speak in a nuanced enough way, in that of course awareness is important and education is important. It's usually not enough to create action, and I think the way you framed it was much stronger in that it can help inform, it leads to voter action, it leads to different policy decisions over time. So it was more that it's not enough. You need it, but it's more, it's an enabler, if I may put it that way. And I am absolutely, I'm going to go to this lovely lady here, Hillary, and perhaps you'd introduce yourself and make your comment.
Thank you so much. I've so enjoyed today. My name is Hillary, and I had the absolute delight to be in Ways of Living. But there's two things that struck me when I look at, there's a couple of things that strike me when I look at mental well-being. We got to stop labeling. Like the moment we call it mental well-being, there's baggage, there's garbage, there's all kinds of very difficult connotations to that. And what happens is, like, the same thing with public space. Public space and mental well-being are two, I think, terms that are desperately asking for a redescription, a new life, a new possibility. And when I look at mental well-being, what I think it's about life, how we cope with life. And we designate mental well-being and people that are struggling with mental well-being, if they must have a mental disorder or whatever else. No, they're having a normal reaction to an abnormal world. And so how do we start to really engage in, rather than labeling in these areas? That's why I think spirituality was so, I wasn't in the group, but I would imagine that's why. I would also suggest that education and awareness was big, because maybe we have to become more aware of other alternatives. Maybe we have to educate ourselves on different ways of thinking about this topic. So it's not about awareness and education in the current system, but education and awareness to explore a very different version. And the same thing we talked about in public space. These need to be elevated to the highest. Everybody should have a right to have access to a unique, beautiful, innovative public space. So that's my little bit. Thank you.
I saw lots of heads nodding, and I think it links for us very much in our Ways of Caring room to an ongoing conversation about shifting mental models, which is part of, language. Luigi spoke about the importance of language, and you cannot enter a world that you don't have the language for, and we are defining ourselves into our current world by some of the language we're using. Absolutely. You said Mark was online? Mark, you have the floor. I'll take one more comment after Mark, if there is one, and then I'm passing to Luigi to wrap us up. So to Pamela, after Mark. Is Mark coming off mute? Mark, we see your chat box. Did you want to speak to your comment?
Sorry, I just put my message in chat. I just wanted to thank everyone, especially the group I was in. It was an amazing discussion. I learned a lot because I'm not that educated. And I just wish we had more time to drill down to more radical, as some of the passion that's been evinced today, a more radical proposal for solutions like that came up, like a health credits and a forest hospital and the other ideas from the other groups. I'm happy. I hope there's a chance to do that. I don't know how or when, but I'll volunteer. Anyways, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mark. And Roberta, I'm going to just put you on the spot before I go to Pamela. The tension that you observed between, and I'm thinking of Kristina's group, who is talking about transformational change, and the tension that you observed between, they were talking about the Canadian conservatism and the Dutch move to action, and the tension you observed between our propensity to take little steps and what we need as being transformative change.
Okay, I'm not quite sure how to respond. The point I was making is that in my 25 years experience in the sustainability conversation, it has been focused on making small incremental improvements to ultimately dysfunctional modes of production and consumption that inevitably enable us to defer indefinitely the transformational change required to bring about a viable human future for all of our students to inherit. So we're running out of time. and we need to stop navel gazing and get to solutions that are transformational. And I think the only way to do that is to acknowledge that our current pervasive Western worldview is dysfunctional. And we cannot solve the problems that we have from that worldview. We have to develop a new worldview, a new cosmology. We can learn a lot from our Indigenous friends. One that establishes a more mutually enhancing relationship between the human community and what I can call the more than human community that we share this planet with. We have to relinquish our sense of human exceptionalism and acknowledge that the planetary needs are primary and human needs are derivative, because from our group, you cannot have healthy humans on an unhealthy planet. It's a physical impossibility. And yet we continue to operate from that assumption.
You can see why I offered him the mic. Pamela.
Hi, sorry. I'm Pam Shanehouse, but I think a lot of people know me already. For the two of you, I'd like to know if disability or accessibility, whether any of that was ever mentioned in your, because I didn't see it. I'm sorry, I'm a big accessibility freak. Not a freak, but you know what I mean. Advocate's really, I like that word.
Hi, and thank you for that. And yes, actually, I probably didn't highlight it as clearly as I could have, trying to squish through everything that was in our day, but that was one of the first things that was brought up in terms of, and I implied it a little bit with the equity lens, but the very first thing was around access and accessibility and making sure that we are leading with that, not having it as a simple bolt-on afterthought tick box. Like, this has to be part of all the planning from the very beginning. So yes, it was definitely talked about in our group.
Yeah, I don't think explicitly we had accessibility in that way. I think in terms of expanding diversity and understanding how certain learning systems exclude people generally, just how we approach them. But I don't think in terms of physical disability or accessibility there was anything, unless anyone in the group remembers something that we talked about. But by admission, that's really interesting, of course, that when things, if they don't come up, say, well, why didn't we? But I don't want to make up something that we didn't say either. So.
So, how do I sort of close the event? Maybe I just, we're going to have a wonderful performance, and I'm going to hand it over to Karen soon to introduce it. But I just want to start by talking about the gratitude that I'm feeling right this moment. As I move through the rooms, I heard a lot about the gift economy, and I think today is really a huge expression of the gift economy. I want to thank everyone who's in the room, everyone who's online, Sandia, who brought her class to hear this. She's a professor at George Brown, and a team, BSI, Director of Curriculum and Training. And I want to thank you all, because it is a pivotal moment, like Robert has mentioned. And a lot of us who are older, we've been working this for a long time. And the moment really is here. And we know it because we've seen it for 30, 40 years. And it's this next generation that is going to have to make the difference. So we're here to help you, but you've been here helping us. I want to thank the BSI students and the Polytechnico students who worked during the day. It's so hard to capture all this work, to prepare all this material, to do all the work that you saw them doing. And I just want to extend that thank you, because it's the one thing I've learned from my partner is that sustainability takes a lot of work. everyone loves it, they think it's a great idea, but then when they get to it and they realize it's more work, it becomes really hard, right? So if we're gonna make this breakthrough, it is about working harder and smarter, therefore the smart sustainability that we're trying to promote at BSI. But I want to extend my thank you very much to the facilitators for pulling out such incredible ideas and work from everyone and from preparing. And I know it's just the start for them because we're going to have to meet and pull this together. And I want you to know that what we're going to be doing is coming together to develop the projects and capture everything that you said into meaningful papers that are follow-up to the papers that we wrote at the start, and then define some projects that the BSI will be undertaking over the next 5 years. And I want to thank especially our panelists who came from Northern Alberta, and who came from St. Thomas and from Toronto for bringing their projects. They're people on the ground making this happen, making this work, and they shared with us what they've been doing and the difference they've been making. And I think it's tremendously inspiring to us because that's what we're trying to do with the BSI. It's an engine for creating and bringing solutions to reality. That's the mission of the BSI, and that's what I hope I will continue to do with you, and our BSI team hopes to continue to do with you, is to take these things forward and making them real. And I want to thank Jacob and Karen. They co-produced this event, and they work incredibly hard with our film team and our whole logistic team and the other students who volunteer at the BSI. It's, you know, something like this doesn't happen with a few people. It happens with the participation of so many people, and including our administration, because this kind of thing doesn't happen all the time. So it's a unique privilege to be here at George Brown, where we believe in this stuff to actually enough to do it, right? So I want to thank them as well. And then finally, I want to call on Karen, because I think she started us off with the panel, and she's helping us end it with something that's, I think, really important. We've talked about culture and the importance of how we know and the way of our life. And culture is always how it's expressed out. And she's going to tell us how we're going to celebrate the work that we've done.
Thank you, Luigi. Thank you to the team that did running around behind the scenes, to our amazing facilitators, inspiring the brilliant minds that were here today. Jacob, my partner in crime, thank you all. I'm going to get to the point because I know you don't hear me talk. Kobena Aquaa-Harrison is a storied musician. If you've been to Afrofest, then you know what Kobena is capable of. His work there kind of took Afrofest to the next level over his 20 years of leadership, but he's also a Ghanaian, Bermudian, multidisciplinary artist, producer, composer, storyteller. He has a Juno Award, he has a Chalmers Award, he has a Torchbearer Award. He kind of does it all. I could read a longer bio, but why would I do that when you could just hear what he does? Why, pray tell? So I'm going to throw to Kobena, and then look forward, if you have the energy, to conversations and chilling as you so desire afterwards. Thank you so much. I hope his presentation and highlighting how these organically made instruments speak to that necessity of understanding that as we sit in the West, our connection to the global South is so essential. And one of the great privileges for me in engaging in this process was to hear conversations about sustainability, not about others, without them being present. And so I think someone said to me while we were in the break, if George Brown continues on this path, they will lead, because these conversations about the needs that are required for us to live better in this world are usually othered. So I've been in those conversations in the Caribbean or on parts of West Africa where the other is meeting, but I've not seen that convergence of the two of us getting together. This city's, I think, the most diverse in the world. We're all here, so why not? Here's to leading. Kobe?
Merci. I'll speak small because that's the name of my instrument. This instrument is called seprewa. Seprewa in Akan language, it means se is to speak, pre to brush, and wa because it's the small, like junior small size. So speak, touch, small is the name of the instrument. So I'm going to speak, touch, small because we finished the day. But I'm very thankful for this invitation. And this conference, I wish I'd been here for the whole thing because it really fascinates me and engages my thinking on everything that I do pretty much. This seprewa is made, I made it myself in Ghana a few years ago. I'd never seen it before. I've been hearing it, but we just heard it on recordings. Nobody ever saw the thing. And one day I was filming, and someone was playing it, and I turned the camera and I said, you know, we make so many things from whatever in Africa. I thought this is just something somebody made from a tuna can or whatever they found. So he told me the history of the instrument from the 17th century. And I said, take me to your leader or your teacher. And he took me to the teacher who played for me. And then I interviewed the teacher, and he said, Osei Koranchi. And he said, oh, Kobena, we're glad you come home. You're going to help us revive this instrument and in Ghana before it disappears, and then make it an international thing. And I was filming this, shaking my head like, don't say this on my camera. I need to make money. I don't hear kaching there. I didn't even know how to play it. I didn't have one. I learned from him, and at the end of the day, when I had to leave after a few months, I didn't have one. So with my woodworking skill, I went to my dad's garage and found what was leftovers to make his new bed frame. This was a tabletop, this curved piece. And I had to cut it with a flat saw until it was round, and take the other scraps of the bed and made this instrument. The last piece was this one, which came from a hardware store in Toronto. But even that took 2 years to find the right piece of it. So seprewa, since then, it's been to Japan and Bali and Costa Rica and everywhere. And as my teacher said, I would be doing, that's what I've been doing with it. I haven't made it famous in Ghana, but I've taken it around the world, and I'm glad to share it with you here today, this piece of scraps that makes beautiful music. Dis pas ça à moi, dis pas ça à moi. Dis-moi seulement la vérité, vérifiez-la moi. Entendez mes mots, traduisez mes mots. Traduisez ce que vous voudrez, mais attendez la dernière mot. Entendez mes mots, regardez mes mains, entendez c'est ma cœur, actionnez-vous voir, actionnez-vous voir. Answer your iPhone. Thank you. The last little bit I'll say about that, this instrument sound, marimba, it's often called marimba. And people say, oh, marimba, or they say, this is like the off xylophone, or it looks like a xylophone. And I always say, this is like saying you resemble, this is like saying your great-great-grandmother resembles you. Because this is the one that came before xylophone, and before marimba, and before vibraphone. So when we talk about things like sustainability and history and culture, this is all made from natural, this is just wood, goat skin, and calabash from a tree. And the buzzing sound comes from a spider's nest or spider's silk that's put on the holes on the calabash. So, and it's been very hard to be, this is one that has a lot of plastic The plastic doesn't sound as good as the spider's nest. Silk versus plastic, right? Wood and goat skin. Somebody ate the goat, we give thanks, but it didn't go to waste. This will last 50, 60, 80 years. The same with the wood. And the Sepawa, again, goat skin, I actually took it from one of my drums that broke. So I took that skin, put it on this one. The leftover wood from the furniture. And fishing line. So that's all it is just natural materials. Even the mallet is natural tree rubber and more wood. I can't even replace these with anything manufactured for orchestral. It doesn't work as well as this. So the thing nature has given us is going to last always a long time. It's always going to be the marker for everything that comes after that's artificial, modified, or whatever. And I think it's important to have that focus, I think with education, someone mentioned it today, of looking at what was indigenous and natural things. And they can be imitated, but even marimba or jili or balafon or timbila, amadinda as this is called, ends up on your iPhone. And many of the ringtones on the iPhone is just modifications of this sound. So we don't escape from the history and the tradition, and everything is built on it. So that's all I want to say. Thank you very much for this invitation.
Thank you so much.
The mic's on. Shh, they will hear everything.
I just wanted to quickly say, I mean, I'm blessed with amazing friends that you can call literally in the last minute. Our original performer was sick, like in the hospital sick. And I was kind of like, why haven't I heard from Essie? Why haven't I heard from Essie? And they were like, I'm trying to push through. But I was like, surgery? Why are we having this conversation? I'm like, I think we'll figure something out. And then my brain went into like, who do I call? And I thought, Kobena, if he's here, he could have been in West Africa or somewhere else, as you heard. But he was here, and I was like, he'll come. I don't know what you canceled for me, but bless you. I owe you a goat. I'm going to throw back to Luigi to say the final thank yous, but thank you for being an amazing audience, and thank you, my friend.
Kobena, I just want to thank you because the music, when you came in with the Sepawa, it was exactly how we felt at the start of the charrette. We were all meeting each other, and we're all a bit nervous, and we were all kind of, dodging each other. But it was such a beautiful sound, right? And then the whole piece you played, for me, it reminded me, if you needed a soundtrack for the last day and a half, that was truly a soundtrack of what we experienced. Starting quiet, then moving rhythmically, and then the joy that was coming out in your voice. I can't thank you more for what was an amazing performance, and what a gift we have in Toronto to have performers like you who live here amongst us. Thank you. Thanks. I'm just going to say thank you, everyone. Please feel free to mingle, and I look forward to meeting again. Okay.